was getting hungry just listening to Ms. Lambropoulos' sound check. Just to remind colleagues and witnesses of the audio feedback problem that we've been having. I'm not going to go through the entire script again, but it is a pretty serious problem, and so if we could keep these earpieces away from the microphones, and when they're not in use, put them on the dot, that would be very helpful. We have with us today, colleagues, three witnesses, Mike Greenley from MDA Space, Brian Gallant coming us virtually. Brian, good to see you. I think I saw you on Spark Street Mall last week. And well, that's you can discuss that with him, Mr. Rouzan. And Michelle Beck, along with Stephen Hampton from Telesat. This is turning out to be really quite an interesting study, folks, and I'm anticipating that each one of you will have something really insightful to say. May I first of all ask Mr. Greenley for his opening 5-minute statement, and then Mr. Gallant, and then Madame Beck. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today on the essential topic of space defense in Canada. My name is Mike Greenley. I'm the CEO of MDA Space, Canada's largest space company, and the chair of the board of Space Canada, Canada's industry association for all of our space companies. Brian's the CEO. He'll speak next. Today, I get to lead Canada's largest space company and export our capability globally with over $1 billion in annual sales forecast this year. I get to do that because Canada made three key strategic decisions. Canada decided to be the third country to put a satellite into space to better understand how satellites could enable telecommunications across our country. And as a result of that, on a long journey, today, MDA Space is a world leader in digital low Earth orbit communication satellite constellations. Canada also decided to develop synthetic aperture radar, or SAR satellites, to monitor our country and our coastlines. And today, MDA Space is the world leader in broad area SAR satellites globally, based on the legacy RadarSat heritage. And thirdly, Canada decided to contribute space robotics, initially in the form of Canadarm to the Space Shuttle program, and subsequently to the International Space Station, where it has been operating for 25 years. And now MDA Space is working on the third generation of the Canadarm for the Moon, work that has enabled us to launch our own commercial product line, MDA Skymaker, to the global space market. These moves by Canada were critical, and they established Canada as a space leader in civil and military space capability, and they gave Canada relevance, which was generated via contributions to the Allied team, which added to Canada's sovereignty and geopolitical power. Today's space capability is increasingly important in military operations, and is increasingly important to everyday civilian life, and must therefore be protected and defended. But in my opinion, Canada has fallen behind from a military space capability perspective and is not engaging its industrial base effectively. As a result, our relevance in a rapidly changing geopolitical world is declining, and along with it, our ability to protect and defend Canadians from a space perspective. Our single largest key challenge and our single largest opportunity is to reverse this trend, is to take a whole of Canada approach to defense military capability delivery. To achieve this, there are several things we urgently need to do. First, we must establish a classified dialogue between the Defense Department and the industrial base on the true threats in space and the future military need. Military space activity occurs at the top secret level of security and above, and the military and industry must be able to talk about the threat and talk about the capability requirements well in advance of procurement and well in advance of operational need. Today, we cannot do that. And as a result, industry cannot be prepared to innovate and have defense solutions ready for procurement and operational need when procurements suddenly appear decades later. Second, we must establish a commercial partnership between defense and industry. The Canadian Forces continue to be stuck in a procurement pattern from the past, ensuring that the Canadian Forces own and operate all defense space capability themselves. Today, many nations, including the United States, Department of Defense, and the United Kingdom, have established a polity of build only what you cannot buy as a service, with the intent to purchase vast amounts of space-based Earth observation data, communication services, launch services, and other space operational support, including counterspace, as a service from industry. Canada must start to do this, or they will significantly delay the establishment of critical military capability while waiting for their procurement processes to complete. It is faster and cheaper, in many cases, to procure via commercial service from industry, and it leverages a deep knowledge base that does not historically exist inside the Canadian forces. Third, Canada must focus on engaging the Canadian space industrial base, which is world-leading, to purchase technology and services in support of space operations and defense of the country. Interoperability and interdependency with the United States is important, especially in combined operations such as NORAD, but Canada must do this in a manner that engages the domestic industrial base. In doing this, Canada will ensure sovereignty, economic stability, and reestablish our relevance and geopolitical power that comes from contributing capability to a combined team. All nations engage their domestic industrial base on defense and security as a first priority, and Canada needs to do the same. Global fairness is not required. It is not conducted in other nations and results in Canada negotiating with itself on the global stage. And lastly, we need to move faster. We are missing opportunity. As an example, you'll hear from Telesat today, Canada needs communications in the north. Canada has identified procurement spend to purchase space capability for communications in the north circa 2038. Meanwhile, Telesat will launch a global communication capability with satellites built by MDA Space in 2027. If we had a conversation today, it could potentially be configured to deliver military communications in the Arctic a decade faster as a commercial service. A decade faster. We must think like this. We must start to behave like the rest of the Western world about the establishment of military space capability through a whole-of-Canada approach. Thank you for the opportunity.
Mr. Gallant, 5 minutes, please.
Bonjour à vous tous et toutes. Merci.
Good day, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to be among you today.
Solutions are an essential part of Canada's defense strategy, contributing directly or indirectly to virtually all defense operations. That is why the team at Space Canada, an organization that represents the Canadian space ecosystem, is so pleased to see this committee undertake this study of Canada's space defense. Chair and members of the House of Commons Standing Committee on National Defense, thank you for undertaking this study, and thank you for inviting Space Canada to be a part of this exercise. Our organization represents over 80 Canadian space innovators who collectively play an essential role in protecting the environment and combating climate change, bridging the digital divide, enabling humanity to explore beyond our planet, and safeguarding Canada's security and sovereignty. Indeed, space capabilities connect Canada's personnel when operating at home and around the world. They provide intelligence and information vital to decision-making and allow Canada to contribute to the collective defense of North America and internationally with our NATO allies. The Canadian space sector contributes nearly $3 billion to the Canadian economy every year, sustaining thousands of jobs, largely in STEM, that pay on average 64% more than the Canadian average and 32% more than other jobs in the aerospace sector. Moreover, the space sector is very R&D intensive with over $500 million of annual investment. This is 18 times higher than other manufacturing sectors. The global space sector is projected to grow exponentially between now and 2040, estimated to reach over $1 trillion a year. Les capacités spatiales procureront des...
Space capabilities will deliver operational benefits for Canada's defense, will allow Canada to contribute those capabilities to continental and collective security through existing NORAD and NATO commitments, and will strengthen Canada's space industrial base. Developing solutions in Canada gives Canada priority access to innovation, sustains Canada's technological advantage, and has the potential to deliver dual-use spin-off technologies for commercial export growth and increases opportunities for partners with our allies and partners.
Que le Canada
It is for these reasons that Canada should accelerate the delivery of identified space defense programs, engage directly with Canada's space innovators, expand defense research and development programs, and establish a National Space Council to coordinate space priorities across the Government of Canada.
Canada is a leader in space. The competition is getting tougher. Canada's space industry risks being left behind in the face of the increasingly competitive global landscape at a time when space capabilities have never been more important or strategic. Space Canada is therefore emphatically supportive of the Government of Canada's recent commitment in the tabled budget to create a National Space Council. Inspired by the U.S. example, a National Space Council will deliver a whole-of-government approach to space. It should be an internal government body led by ministers who meet at least biannually, if not quarterly, to, amongst other things, undertake a review of space systems procurement, including a benchmarking study to compare how other nations employ rapid procurement practices and serve as key customers for innovative space technologies, de moderniser le cadre réglementaire.
To modernize the space regulatory framework that builds on the 2023 consultation by the Canadian Space Agency, leveraging Canada's space industrial base with its world-class capabilities, workforce, innovation, and its track record of delivery, and guide the development and implementation of a whole-of-government national, civil, defense, and commercial space policy. This would position Canada at the forefront of the new space economy and deliver associated economic, social, environmental, defense, and national security benefits.
Further discussing the pivotal role space plays in securing Canada's defense and security with you all today. Encore une fois, merci beaucoup pour l'invitation.
Thank you, Mr. Gallant. Madame Beck, 5 minutes, please.
So good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting Telesat to participate today. Merci pour l'invitation aujourd'hui.
Thank you for the invitation. My name is Michelle Beck. I am Vice President of Sales at Telesat, and I'm here with Stephen Hampton, Director of Public Policy and Strategic Accounts.
And most innovative satellite operators, operating for over 55 years from our headquarters in Ottawa. As a proud Canadian company, we play a central role in Canada's commercial and defense connectivity infrastructure. Today, we connect over 7 million households to high-definition television, provide broadband and other lifeline services to rural, remote, and Indigenous communities, and deliver mission-critical services to Canada's national security and public safety community. And we offer these same types of services all around the world. This study comes at a pivotal time for Canada and our sector. There is a global high-stakes space race underway, and it is critical to Canada's sovereignty and national security. Critical sovereign communication, whether in air, at sea, or on the ground, is fundamental to Canada's national security and that of our allies. And this can only be achieved through advanced satellite communications networks. Specifically, global, ubiquitous, interoperable satellite communications networks that are not only sovereign and secure, but that are also allied by design and capable of delivering joint allied operations in key regions like the Arctic and the Indo-Pacific. And that's why we've undertaken the most ambitious and innovative project in our proud history, a $6 billion state-of-the-art LEO satellite constellation known as Telesat Lightspeed. It will initially consist of nearly 200 highly advanced satellites and will deliver affordable, secure, and resilient fiber-like broadband connectivity and enable 5G everywhere on Earth, including all of Canada and the Arctic. It's the largest space program ever conceived in Canada and will shape the domestic space sector for decades to come. Telesat Lightspeed will be designed, manufactured, and operated in Canada. Telesat Lightspeed is a true Canadian flagship program. It will help bridge the global digital divide, create and sustain thousands of high-quality jobs in Canada, and spur domestic innovation, investment, and exports, and ensure that Canada is at the forefront of the rapidly growing and highly strategic new space economy. Today's global defense landscape is changing rapidly, both on Earth and in space, driven by climate change, new geopolitical dynamics, emerging technologies, and rising security threats to our national sovereignty. La défense de notre pays et de nos zones géographiques stratégiques.
The defense of Canada and our strategic geographic zones like the Arctic are more important than ever. To adapt to these changes, governments throughout the world focus increasingly on the role that space plays in their defense infrastructure. The space industry on the global level has radically changed since the beginning of the century, becoming more dynamic, innovative, and more important.
Traditionally, defense projects in space were directed and developed exclusively by government. The pace of technological change was incremental, oftentimes bogged down by procurement processes, cost overruns, and a fundamental lack of urgency. Today, a new space race is emerging with commercial companies developing space-based assets and capabilities both for commercial and defense purposes. Over the past several years, we have seen generational leaps in technological capabilities, with many calling this sea change the transformation from old space to new. As Canada looks toward NORAD modernization and delivering the most advanced technology to its armed forces, it should follow the lead set by the US, the UK, and other countries around the world that have moved beyond the legacy approach of exclusively relying on dedicated government-owned and operated defense systems to meet accelerating threats. Instead, these governments are working hand in glove with their domestic private sector, leveraging significant commercial investments made in cutting-edge allied by design capabilities, and are integrating these space-based assets into their defense systems. Canada is a world leader in satellite communications. We have clear competitive advantage, and it should be exploited to its fullest. The Government of Canada should look to partner with the space sector to rapidly ensure that the Canadian Armed Forces and our allies have access to the most cutting-edge technologies like Telesat Lightspeed. Merci encore une fois pour le...
Thank you once again for the opportunity to participate in your meetings, and we'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Ms. Gallant, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so the first questions will be for MDA through you. Since the revelation of Putin's willingness to use nuclear weaponization of space, has any entity from the federal government approached you to discuss this?
To discuss that topic? No. No one has approached us to discuss that topic. Various intelligence and security agencies from the federal government do approach us and work with us on national security issues and our ability to ensure that we have very secure operations, both domestically and in orbit. But on that topic, no.
What about contacts you may have in the United States? Has anyone shared anything with you on this topic?
No, I think in general, like people might generally talk about those things in an unclassified manner at conferences and the like, but no.
How vulnerable are satellites and infrastructure relying on satellites with potential nuclear explosion in low Earth orbit?
I think that satellites are susceptible to any form of explosion in orbit. I think that most nations are working hard to ensure that we don't do that. I think that space and counter space, efforts in counter space, there's lots of bluster that's out there, but I think that if folks go around exploding things in orbit, that it does just as much harm to their own assets as it would to an adversary because of the debris that would be created from that's in those orbital paths. You risk just as much your own operations as the next guy. So I think people, bluster a fair bit on these topics, but in general, the business of messing around with somebody else's satellite capability would be more subtle than causing explosions.
What should the federal government do to protect satellites from this new threat on the horizon?
I think that in general, the Canadian forces with their space operations need to continue to work very effectively with their allies. It seems that is the case and that it is increasing. There is also the introduction of what's called a commercial integration cell that will occur in Canada that also exists in the United States as an example, whereby those commercial entities that operate significant military capability, not military capability, but space capability like MDA or Telesat, who are here today, would work weekly, regularly, with the military on coordinating our space activities and ensuring that we're mutually aware of threats and taking actions ourselves and with allies to be able to protect those threats.
Okay, in the Financial Times, a leaked U.S. report indicated that China is developing a sophisticated cyber weapon that deny, control, and hijack foreign satellites. So potentially, China could take over satellites and gather data without our knowledge, or rendering them useless by disabling us access. From your expertise, how credible is this a threat to Canadian national security, if indeed it does persist?
Mm-hmm. In my remarks, I made the comment about the importance of us getting through the process of security clearances so that Canadian industry could engage properly with the Department of Defense about the highly classified nature of the threats that are going on in space. So I would have limited awareness of that because we have spent over 3 years engaging with the Government of Canada to try to get the necessary security clearances of government personnel and appropriate industry personnel so that we could have conversations to discuss the types of topics that you are mentioning. That will come soon someday, but the bureaucracy is very bogged down in their ability to get the necessary clearances so that we can have these conversations. However, I do think it's a highly plausible situation whereby, in terms of just general knowledge of electronic warfare measures and the ability to jam and interfere with electronic signals, that it would make sense that people would have capability to be able to interfere with satellites, and we definitely pay attention to that when we build and protect them today.
With respect to RadarSat additions, what progress are you aware of that's being made in the adding more satellites to the constellation?
RadarSat Constellation mission has 3 satellites in it. MDA built those and launched them in June of 2019. The government, as of last October, has announced an additional program called RadarSat Plus, where as a minimum there will be one additional satellite will be procured to add to that constellation to provide resiliency and start the initiating studies to be able to plan the replacement of RadarSat Constellation to ensure continuity. In addition, firms like MDA, back to my comments on collaborating commercially, MDA has invested over $400 million over the last few years to build Chorus, our 4th generation of RadarSat-capable satellites, which will be owned and operated by MDA and would provide an additional commercial service that, if the government wanted to leverage that in partnership with industry, they could do so as well to provide additional resiliency to Canada's radar surveillance capability.
Have you seen any movement on the part of the federal government to start moving this ahead?
The RadarSat Plus procurement, yes. Talking to us about procurement of commercial services, not yet.
Okay. For Telesat, there have been incidents where airline Wi-Fi was used in an attempt to hack into avionics so they could take control of the aircraft. How much of the price for an airline in-air Wi-Fi service goes to cybersecurity, and is Telesat, has it ever been attacked by such a cyber incident?
That's an important question. Unfortunately, Ms. Gallant has not left you any time to answer it, but hopefully you can circle back in on that. Ms. Lambropoulos, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to begin by thanking our witnesses for being here to answer questions today. And I'll start with Mr. Greenlee. You spoke a little bit about interoperability, and we've heard this before, even in previous studies. And I'm wondering what specific recommendations you could give the Government of Canada in order to help it promote its own Made in Canada equipment and technology in order to ensure that we're benefiting Canadian companies.
I think the important thing is to make sure we have interoperability in terms of the overall capability, not necessary, that allows us to therefore use Canadian systems and solutions and then contribute. For example, on Sapphire, which is a space surveillance satellite that was built by MDA Space, and we are contracted to operate it, D&D contributes on a daily basis imagery in terms of what the satellites are doing in space as part of the overall picture in an interoperable way. Our radar satellites imagery, we contribute that through D&D down into the United States. So these types of mechanisms, and then of course the Telesat example that we used today, could contribute all kinds of communications capabilities. So we want to be able to make sure that our capability and our procedures are interoperable, but that the technical solutions come from Canadian industry in terms of building them and operating them in support of Department of National Defence.
And so are you of the opinion that Canada is already doing a good job at making sure that that's happening, or is there something more we could do to help promote what's being made in Canada?
We have had some good experience of doing this in the past. I think that there is a worry bead that's out there right now. I think that if we look at domestic, like Army, Navy, Air Force type military activity right now, that there seems to be a bit of a push to make sure that interoperability and interexchangeability with the United States means that we use a bit more of the U.S. systems. We're starting to see that on several procurements right now. We would not want to see that transition into space. We would want to see us continuing to leverage our space capability and be interoperable using Canadian systems, not going and starting to procure American ones.
Okay, and I guess I'm going to open the floor to all of the witnesses for this next question. The Minister of National Defence came before our committee and noted that Canada's new defence policy is also an industrial policy. And earlier this year at the Aerospace on the Hill, the Minister Champagne actually mentioned an aerospace strategy that would eventually come into play and that the government is starting to consider. What role do you think that your industry could play in this, and how do you think that this strategy would look for the companies represented here today?
Go ahead, Michelle.
How would you contribute to this strategy?
Yes, so thank you. So we were quite pleased, actually, to see the new defense policy being issued, and we're actually quite excited by the fact that the government recognizes the importance of space as well to the space defense policy. The industry is innovating at a very fast pace, making services, technologies, capabilities available faster at a lower price point with probably greater capabilities than governments can move. And so we feel that from a supply perspective, we should be relied upon. We've got expertise that we have been developing for the past 55 years in the sector, and we can provide guidance, consultative services, insight in terms of these capabilities. And so we welcome the opportunity to work hand in glove with the government to advance these types of services and capabilities.
Mr. Gallant?
Maybe I'll go next. Yeah, thank you. For the defense policy review, I just want to echo the comments of Michelle that as an industry, we were very excited to see the way in which space is being talked about in the defense policy update, and very happy to see that there's a clear recognition of the importance of space to national defense and security. In terms of the strategy, the defense policy update, if you will, being an industrial sort of industrial plan, it isn't necessarily as reflected in the written words of the plan, but we can I can certainly attest that in discussions with the department and even more specifically with the minister, that clearly is the intent. So that is certainly something that is supported. The idea that the defense policy update will be a way in which we can further engage and develop the industrial base for space it would be we think important. In terms of having an aerospace strategy, of course, on paper, the idea of having a strategy and a robust exercise to develop it is certainly something that makes sense. One flag that we certainly would have is that space often risks being sort of lost in the shuffle, an afterthought, or just not as much of a priority when it's lumped in with the sort of general term of aerospace. So that would certainly be a flag and a worry of industry.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there.
Not a problem.
Space gets risk of getting lost in space. That was really bad. Madame Normandine, 6 minutes, please.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the witnesses. I'll start with a question for you, Mr. Gallant. You mentioned that Canada should expedite the development of identified space programs. What exactly does this mean, and what does that actually mean in actual fact? To answer in simple terms, we're talking about procurement that needs to be faster. And perhaps I'm speaking beyond our organization, but when it has to do with defense procurement, purely defense procurement, we're already hearing the complaint that it's too slow. Now, with respect to the space sector, an additional challenge is the fact that innovation is happening at such a quick clip. If it takes a decade to go from start to finish of a procurement process for a service or a space product, then innovation means that it may not be useful anymore. Or other countries and other individuals will have systems that have surpassed the ones that we've procured. Thank you very much. Question for you, Madam Beck. In your testimony, you mentioned that Canada has a clear competitive advantage with respect to other countries. In what way is Canada competitive? In the sense that we do know we don't have a launching pad for satellites, etc. What does Canada have as an advantage? The advantage for Canada has to do more with the telecommunications industry. For 50 years now, we've existed. We've been operating satellites for government and for the commercial industry at the same time. We are currently developing a constellation of satellites in low Earth orbit. This is a constellation that provides services that are just incomparable to the services we used to offer. Geostationary satellites, that is. So it's brand new. We have capabilities, rather. We offer very secure, resilient, low latency services that can be of use to government for national defense to support their operations, not just here in Canada, but throughout the world. This is a global constellation. So we have the capacity that's already in-house, and we are developing it further in the constellation. And that really gives us a competitive strength when you look at offering those services directly here in Canada. Thank you very much. I understand you're speaking about Telesat Lightspeed. Perhaps you could reassure us a little bit about that, because I know the Globe and Mail last year indicated that Telesat Standards & Poor's rating had dropped because there was some issue as to equity or loans. This was about a year ago. Some analysts at Standards & Poor's were saying that perhaps Telesat had put all its eggs in the same basket. Well, what can you tell us? Where are we at a year later, financially and in terms of the company's vitality?
Perfect. Thank you for the question. the question. So in August of last year, we announced that we'd entered into a contract with MDA Space to build 198 satellites. We have funding arrangements in place to be fully funded. We are, since August, we've hired over almost 150 people. We're investing and looking to do significantly more this year. We're investing tens of millions of dollars, and I think our CapEx guidance for this year is almost $1.4 billion. So we are off to the races and very excited about the future. And I think Michelle's spoken to it, and Brian and Mike. The space sector is exploding around the world, and having a global low latency broadband network truly is a differentiator. And for customers here in Canada, but all around the world, we're hearing we need this, we need this, we need this. So we're very excited and very optimistic about the future.
Merci beaucoup. Et en une minute,
Thank you very much. And in 1 minute, could you give us an idea of the advancements of things with respect to Lightspeed and what the timelines are?
Yeah, so right now we'll start launching satellites in mid-2026. We'll enter global service towards the end of 2027, and then we'll continue adding satellites from there. So that's the timeline.
merci. Je prendrais peut-être.
I'll take those 40 seconds that I still have in the next round.
Madame Madsen, 6 minutes.
Thank you all for attending today. A lot of you have spoken about this incredible opportunity for Canadian jobs. I did want to ask, of course, though, in terms of the jobs that are currently held through MDA, Unifor has been on strike since April 8th, and they are incredibly proud to be part of that production of those satellites, putting them into orbit. Can you talk to us, though, about the fact that MDA won't meet their demands for a cost of living adjustment, pension, a fair pension? Can you talk to us about what you're doing, what steps you're taking to get back to that table and to provide those incredible workers and those incredible jobs, the people that do them with what they're asking?
MDA Space has a great workforce. We're up over 3,000 people now. We had about 1,700 people when I started 6 years ago. We crossed the 3,000 line this year. We hired 900 people last year. We'll hire over 1,000 people this year. So certainly the growth in space is turning into good jobs. We have a history as a company of being able to work with all kinds of employees, both represented and non-represented employees. And we have a very good, I feel, human resources framework for being able to do that in terms of total compensation, in terms of our salaries that we get and our benefits programs, which are actually very, very good. I won't comment specifically on an active negotiation, but we do look forward. We do respect, certainly, the represented workers' desire to be able to go on strike and be able to express themselves that way as part of the process of dealing with represented workers. And we're optimistic that we'll come to a solution here as we go through the next few weeks.
Fair enough. One of the things that New Democrats have done recently was our motion on Palestine, which included ending military exports to Israel. Of course, many Canadian civil organizations have tried to track and report on Canada's arms export, our arms trade regime. A lot of what we export is towards Israel's space program. Have you received anything from the government, and I think I'll take that to Mr. Greenlee and Ms. Beck, in terms of what the government promised that the House would issue the notice to exporters and the ending of those exports? If you have any indication or if you've received any communications from government, if you have any connection with that, I'm just curious about progress on that motion.
For me personally, in terms of we have export control teams in the company that deal directly with the government every day. Anything we export has to have the appropriate export permits from the government of Canada. And so that interface is there. I don't see all that daily traffic, so I just honestly can't answer. I have not personally seen anything, but I wouldn't normally. The export control teams would see that.
Is this something that you can report back to the committee so that we can see that if the government is following through on their commitments on that?
You could certainly go and ask, certainly, yeah.
Okay. And from you, Ms. Beck, as well?
Yeah, likewise. We do have an export control working group as well at Telesat. But to our knowledge, and I just checked with Mr. Hampton, we haven't heard of anything coming into to the company. But we'll take an undertaking and get back to you.
Thank you very much. One of the things, too, that was mentioned a couple times, and I'm curious, the relationship that we have with the United States in terms of that space domain has been strained at times because of the Americans' policies on foreign entities, other national, like Canadian companies, for example, accessing what the infrastructure that they have, technologies they have. And I ask this in terms of maybe some of the commentary around the National Space Council. Is that something that you believe that council could help to negotiate, or do you have any other recommendations in terms of that limit on the barriers that mainly the U.S. government, because they are so dominant in this field, have in terms of Canadian participation, sharing of data, that sort of thing?
Just real quick from me, we do have a lot of mechanisms to be able to work with the United States, and often we just have to be able to have the fortitude to exercise them, to be able to stick up for Canadian interests, and in our negotiations with the United States, to be able to stick up for Canadian built systems in combined force and combined government solutions. So I think that that we can do that. I think that the National Space Council could certainly help. I'm sure Brian would have something to say about that.
Thank you, Mike. If I may add, whether you think that you, in the general term, whether you think that we need to sort of compete with the U.S. and try to put our elbows up when it comes to our space sector, or you think that we need to collaborate more with the U.S., a National Space Council will help us do that. A National Space Council will help us get organized, obviously making sure that we can be as nimble as possible, as holistic as possible. And if I may, from the previous question that I didn't have time to completely finish, an aerospace strategy would make it that my worry would make it that it would be sort of a siloed strategy, meaning that perhaps it's ISED that's focused on the strategy, where I think when it comes to space, we really need a whole of government strategy that embodies the way in which other departments can play a role and what space can do for other departments. So a National Space Council will help us have that holistic approach that we need to be able to be a big player on the international stage for all the reasons already discussed as to why space is important. We think that makes a lot of sense. And then when it comes to collaborating with the U.S., the U.S. wants countries, especially allied countries, to step up and sort of, for the lack of a better way of describing it, get their act together. And they created a National Space Council to coordinate their efforts. And I think it would be very well received from a collaboration point of view if we did the same.
Unfortunately, again, Mr. Gallant, I apologize for having to cut you off again. Colleagues, we got 15 minutes and 25 minutes worth of questions. This math doesn't work. So 3 minutes each, and Ms. Normandin, 2 minutes. Mr. Kelly.
Thanks. Okay. I'd like to start, Mr. Greenlee, just by unpacking a little bit of your testimony in your opening round and in response to some of the questions from Mrs. Gallant. You said that you were somewhat dismissive of the threat of a nuclear explosion in space under the, I guess, the thought that any such event disrupts all sides and that it's not possible to just target an adversary. But we've ignored you characterize it as the bluster of certain people, and we're talking about the bluster of Putin. We've ignored his bluster at our own peril. He has a proven track record of comfort with war of attrition, where he sacrifices his own equipment and his own people's lives. So is there what would be a prudent defense response? I think we've got to do better than just hope that such an event doesn't take place.
To be honest, I think that was me expressing my personal opinions before. I think that the topic that we're into here is certainly one for the military. My previous comments about us needing to make sure that we get the appropriate clearances so that industry and the military can collaboratively talk about these things is essential. And I don't feel I would be informed enough at this time.
Okay, good. Now that takes us to the first ask in your response that the absence of security clearance, does that leave you with more or less just being able to, where would you get your information if you don't have that security clearance?
You're left with unclassified information that the general public would have from the media or participation in conferences. Often what happens with security clearances is that the system has been established whereby if you have a contract whereby you need to be secure, then you can get the appropriate clearance. However, in this case, we need to have the clearances so we can have the conversations to develop the capabilities to then get the contract, and the government has to do things differently.
Okay. So how will Canada ensure domain awareness in the Arctic when RadarSat reaches its end of life? We've had testimony at this committee and an Auditor General report that show there's a gap coming. How can we prevent this coverage gap?
I think that RadarSat Plus will help by adding additional satellite capability into the constellation. So you're going to get some resiliency from that, leveraging commercial services.
If I may, I've only got a really short time left.
Sorry.
What about non-maritime domain awareness? Does your company, or is there technology available that can give us? We've heard of the huge gaps in awareness in the Arctic.
Right.
Are there solutions at hand commercially?
Yes, there are solutions for non-maritime domain awareness, yes. Our Chorus system, for example, which combines what's called C-band and X-band, two different types of synthetic aperture radar, greatly enhances our capability to do non-maritime domain awareness.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Collins, 3 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I'll start with Mr. Gallant, if I could. Mr. Gallant, you talked about the high wages and the amount of R&D in the sector. What recommendations do you have for the Government of Canada as it relates to attracting and retaining top talent? So supports for colleges and universities, immigration policies that might help us ensure that the labor force that you require in the short, medium, long term is there for the companies that are driving innovation here in Canada.
Thank you for the question. Those are certainly ways in which those are certainly policies in which we could be able to help ensure we have the strong workforce needed. But two things. First, one is we need to make sure that we've chosen this to be a priority sector for us. There's immense growth projected for the next few decades in space, but if we sort of don't again get our act together and make sure that we're set up to seize those opportunities, we may not have to worry about the workforce as much. And then the second thing I would say, National Space Council could help us with the first thing mentioned, and then my next thing would be that ensuring that we have consistent investment in space. As you can imagine, it's in the past it's been very sort of peaks and valleys when it comes to major projects and investments in space, and I won't belabor that point. It's pretty evident. It's hard to keep a workforce, recruit it, retain it, and keep it as productive as possible when you have those sort of peaks and valleys that affect our large space companies, but also the SMEs in the ecosystem as well.
Thank you for that. Ms. Beck, we've heard testimony in this meeting and others that with increasing competition, there'll be more congestion in space, and I think the Government of Canada needs to develop some policies as it relates to being a responsible actor in this space. What policies or recommendations should we adopt as it relates to ensuring that the Canadian companies that we're working with are responsible actors in space? And I guess my next question would be, what steps should we take to ensure that we're protecting the infrastructure that you have in the Earth's orbit?
Thank you. So I think the Space Council certainly can help develop the right policies to ensure that space remains available, that it remains a protected area, and that it identifies regulations for at least Canadian companies to operate in and abide by those specific regulations. Today we work through ICED, we work through CSA in terms of the regulation, but certainly a Space Council would actually bring that and would bring together, I think, sort of the global interests as well to ensure that space remains secure, available.
Thank you, Mr. Collins, unfortunately. Madame Normandin, 1 minute plus 30 seconds.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. A question for Mr. Greenlee. You have an impressive track record in defense. You talked about challenges to the defense industry, meaning that it's difficult to produce well-adapted goods in this field. People were talking about dual use. Could you tell us, does dual use mean that we can be quicker in terms of procurement, or does it mean that the specificity of a military needs, let's say, slow things down on the civil side? Can you tell us about the interaction between civil and military in space? Can you give us an idea about that?
Yeah, I think that dual-use technologies would mean that they can be used for both civil and military purposes. We're increasingly seeing the opportunities for dual use. In space, we've talked about Earth observation, which we use for climate change, for example, or climate detection, or immigration detection, or deforestation detection, also being the same technology we use to detect things for military operations. Telesat's example of providing high-speed communications for civil purposes can be absolutely reused for military purposes. Work that we do on servicing spacecraft with robotics to be able to tend to and service satellites could also be used for military purposes someday in satellites. So the same technology can be used for both. I think the important thing is that in military procurement, recognizing what the core capability is and that they can benefit from dual use of civilian capability, we don't have to perfectly customize everything for military purposes every time.
Dean, 1 minute. Ms. Matheson.
So throughout the Cold War, the International Space Station represented a shared project. It brought the world together in difficult times. Throughout Apollo-Soyuz project, we saw it help in terms of cooperation and throughout that Cold War detente. So as we now are seemingly moving away from the International Space Station towards that commercialization of a space domain, what are the wider implications that would have on diplomacy, and what can we do to increase or ease that tension that we feel here on the ground up in space?
I think that in the commercial space stations, they're going to be very international. So a lot of different countries are going to want to get access to those. And so they'll be like, large commercial collaborative industrial parks. But if we look at the moon on the Artemis program, we've had 36 countries now. We had 6 countries collaborate on the International Space Station. The Artemis Accords, we now have had 36 countries sign up with the United States to collaborate on the moon. And so the actual level of geopolitical collaboration on the next hardest problem, it used to be the hard problem was to have the space station. Now the hard problem to go and live and work on the moon. And the amount of participation globally now to have 36 countries working together is tremendous. We also have another group.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave the answer there. Thank you. Mr. Bazan, 3 minutes.
Thanks to our witnesses for being here. Mr. Greenlee, you talked about the Chorus satellite constellation. That's in service already?
Sorry, no, that's in development. It'll be launched in the fourth quarter of 2025.
Okay, and it's commercially available when it does launch?
Yes.
It's considered an ISR platform?
Yes.
Who would be able to use it outside of the government of Canada if it's an ISR?
We will have customers on our current RadarSat 2, which we own and operate. We would have customers in 25 countries around the world. So defense and intelligence agencies around the world would contract us to provide them with surveillance.
Would that include near peer and adversarial nations?
It includes countries that we have export permits from the government of Canada to deliver a service to.
Okay. So that would be screened, and there's a safety check there. Then
absolutely,
from
all the time.
Affairs.
Yep, and it changes based on the geopolitical situation.
Okay. Both of you have talked about security clearances, both from Telesat and from MDA. Is the government chronically overclassifying information to make it difficult for Canadians and for Canadian industry to understand the needs and threats that we're facing?
No, I don't think so. I think that the level of classification of information is appropriate. It's just making sure that the people that need access to that are cleared and approved.
But that also provides more of a bureaucratic slowdown and red tape to get people cleared in a timely manner, which we hear over and over again, that not just Canadian, not just industry representatives, but also people that work for the government of Canada, including the Canadian Armed Forces, can't get their security clearances. Ms. Beck.
Yeah.
So I think in some instances there could be more open dialogue with the parties that are one supplying the services And if it's just shared on a need-to-know basis, it would facilitate an exchange.
The problem with that is that whenever the government has a need-to-know basis, they always determine that you don't need to know. That's the easy way out. So my question then comes down to is you both have got national defense contracts already. How was those security clearances that you had for those projects not continued forward on future contracts?
So we do have. So we were asked to get security clearances 2 years ago, and they were actually fast tracked for Telesat. We believe it was never indicated why we needed these top security clearances. We were told that we would be consulted on just shortly. That consultation never came. We're still waiting on the sharing of information. We believe that it was associated with the creation of the commercial integration cell activity work that is about to launch, frankly. So we do have clearances, and we're waiting actually to have these very open dialogues, exchanges of information pertaining to the security, at least of satellite communications aspects.
Thank you, Mr. Bazan. Final 3 minutes, Mr. Fillmore.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to the witnesses. Time has become short, so we're going to go a little quickly here. Mr. Greenlee, it's nice to see you again. In your limited time in your opening statement, you didn't have really much time for detail to go into what you said about this notion of global fairness and Canada seeming to be negotiating with itself. I wonder if you could just take a little bit of time to expand on it.
It's a regular pattern internationally whereby countries, especially on defense and security issues, will leverage their domestic industrial base from a sovereignty and security perspective. As a result of this, they don't worry themselves with making sure that they have international competition and that other countries' firms can come in and compete. It is very natural to be able to say that you want to work with Canadian domiciled companies, for example, to be able to deal with defense and security issues as a matter of first priority. So, for example, if Canada was going to get communications, they wouldn't use like Starlink or maybe OneWeb, which would be American or European based. They would work with Telesat once it's operational because it's Canadian based, as an example, for a military purpose. It's very natural for countries to do that. And so often Canada has a view, it would appear, on defense procurement that it's important to have global, open and fair competition, which allows equal fairness to Canadian firms and international firms on defense and security issues. Canada tends to be a bit unique in that regard. Other countries don't worry about that. And so that's what I meant by Canada negotiating with itself.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Gallant, nice to see you again. I wonder if you could talk about how industry in Canada is doing relative to industry in our allies and partner countries. And if you could think about framing your answer in terms of recommendations, what can government be doing to ensure Canada is keeping up and not lagging?
I won't repeat everything that we discussed today because I think a lot of the conversation regarding developing the industrial base would be a big part of it. But for us, what would be really nice to see is even just have Canada have the share of the global space sector that it enjoys for the overall global economy. Right now, we're actually punching below our weight. When it comes to the global economy, we have a higher percentage than what we have for the global space sector. So an interesting recent report published by Deloitte actually makes the case that if you look at the exponential growth that's predicted for the space sector from now till 2040, that if we could just grab the share of the global space sector economy by 2040 that we enjoy right now of the overall economy, we'd have a $40 billion space sector in Canada, which would be amazing. And that's just really punching at our exact weight. So not too much of a stretch.
Okay, thank you for that. Ms. Beck, you mentioned the commercial integration cell. Brigadier General Adamson, the commander of 3 Canadian Space Division, mentioned that last week as well. What would you have the committee know and understand about the commercial integration cell so that we can help to support the industry in Canada?
Very, very briefly, please.
Yeah, so I think really it's going to be a forum to exchange information on threats relating to space operations. So for us, if we actually see anything that we feel is threatening either our current satellites or our future constellation, we will share that with DND. And likewise, whatever they feel is appropriate, they will share that information. And hopefully we can talk about some best practices, innovative ways to protect our fleet and telecommunication services just generally.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. Unfortunately, we have to bring this hour to a close. I would have preferred a more relaxed atmosphere where I'm not running such a hard clock, but it is what it is. But colleagues, I'd say that all of the conversations we've had about this have been very fascinating, and we may think of expanding this study. But with that, I want to thank each of you for your presence and your patience with us. And you've been a significant contributor to our study here. So with that, colleagues, ask the witnesses to leave, to replace by the new ones. We'll suspend for a minute or two while that happens. we have with us for our second hour from Maritime Launch Services, Mr. Stephen Matier, President and Chief Executive Officer, and from North Star Earth and Space, Stuart Bain, also CEO and co-founder. So I'll just ask you for your opening 5-minute statements, and around 4 minutes I'll start waving my finger at you. I don't wish to interrupt you, but I may have to. So with that, I'll ask for Mr. Matier for your opening 5 minutes, please, sir.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, Mr. Chair, and honorable members of the Standing Committee on National Defense. My name is Stephen Matier. I'm the founder, president, and CEO of Maritime Launch. We're headquartered in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I'm honored to be here today to address the House of Commons Committee on National Defense regarding the current state of Canadian space defense capabilities and programs, including the impact of advancements in space on Canada's sovereignty and national security. The perspective and focus that I will bring to this discussion is related to the crucial need to have assured access to space for Canada through the development of domestic launch capability and its significance to Canada's national defense. If I may take just a moment or two to give you a brief on my background, what brings me here. I have 35 years of experience in the space launch industry. My career has been dedicated to advancing space exploration and ensuring mission safety. I had the privilege of leading teams at the NASA White Sands Test Facility, where I worked on the Space Shuttle program and was awarded the esteemed Astronauts Silver Snoopy Award, if you want to know what that is, and the Space Flight Awareness Award for a continued commitment to safety in human spaceflight. Following my tenure at NASA, I transitioned into consulting, focusing on spaceport development in U.S. and internationally, supporting the regulating, development, and operation of numerous sites, including at Spaceport America, Space Florida, and others. Drawing on my expertise, I was commissioned by a renowned launch company to explore potential locations for spaceport operations in North America, where most of the globe's satellites are manufactured. Through extensive research and analysis, it became evident that Nova Scotia, specifically near the town of Canso, offered unparalleled advantages for Canada's first commercial spaceport, Spaceport Nova Scotia. Our geographic location, positioning in Nova Scotia provides an optimal launch site for our clients to place their satellites into the desired orbits by launching south and or east over the Atlantic Ocean. This range of trajectories are highly desirable to these clients and not easily replicated anywhere else in North America. Spaceport Nova Scotia can replace satellites exactly where satellite operators need them to be for global broadband connections, near-Earth imaging, security services, etc. Economically, in total, we expect the construction alone to contribute $171 million to Canada's GDP and boost employment by an average of 1,600 annual full-time jobs across Canada, with 748 of those within the province of Nova Scotia. Once operational and fully ramped up, we will expect we'll add around $300 million to Canada's GDP annually, boost revenue to governments by more than $100 million, and create close to 1,000 annual full-time jobs across Canada. Developing Canadian launch capability is an economic opportunity we can't afford to miss. But there is another key factor that raises the importance even more, and my reason for being here today. That is the importance of domestic launch capability to Canada's national defense strategy. Canada depends on the performance of its own technologies in space and air in our everyday life. We rely on satellite technologies for communications, surveillance, reconnaissance, navigation, farming, greenhouse gas, weather monitoring, etc. But we've always relied on other countries for launch. Given the turbulent world we live in with threats and opportunities in space, there's a clear imperative for domestic launch infrastructure. Coupling this with the rapid growth of the commercial space sector, as well as the saturation of existing launch capabilities in other countries, specifically the United States, the necessity for our own launch capability has become a vital piece of transportation infrastructure. Whether the launch sites we have used internationally over the decades are overloaded or disabled for any extended period of time, we would not have any means to deploy our technologies. Our global partners are looking for us to be there for them as well. Our location in North America is unique. Orbital space launch is the missing piece. In January of 2023, Maritime Launch was extremely pleased to attend the Government of Canada's announcement to enable commercial launch at the Canadian Space Agency. This announcement committed to modernizing Canada's launch regulations. We also learned that recently the Government of Canada is finalizing negotiations on a technology safeguard agreement, key with the United States. This agreement is critical to the advancement of launch capability in Canada, as its approval will allow for access to mature U.S. launch technology and, importantly, U.S. satellites to be able to launch from Canadian soil. Not only does this bring direct foreign investment into the Maritimes, but it provides for the controls to be able to support the joint interests of secured access to space for our joint North American defense. Economic opportunity is the first, national security is the second, and alliance of strengthening is the third major reason.
Apologize for having to rush you. Mr. Bain, 5 minutes, please.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président et Mesdames et Messieurs les membres du...
Good day, members of the Standing Committee on National Defense. It is my honor and pleasure to appear before you today to support your work on the state of Canadian defense capabilities. I'm here today as founder and CEO of North Star Ciel et Terre. Born and raised in Montreal, I'm an engineer whose career in space began in the late 1980s here in Ottawa, working on the RadarSat mission for Cal Corporation, which became MDA and Honeywell here in Ottawa. Since then, my career has taken me around the world on numerous occasions to get involved in innovative business opportunities and develop new and innovative technologies and products. Headquartered in Montreal, North Star is a Canadian-controlled company that has raised over $140 million, the majority of which came from Telesystem Space, an alliance between Telesystem in Montreal and Rogers in Toronto. North Star has significant business interests in the USA, Europe, Japan, and soon in New Zealand. But it is a company with Canadian values.
Estimated to be $550 billion in 2023. And according to the U.S. Space Foundation, this economy will be worth nearly $2 trillion by 2035, U.S. dollars, of which 80% qualifies as commercial activity. With this, I encourage the Canadian government to embrace the challenge presented and mentioned earlier by the witness, Mr. Gallant, in a report by Deloitte of maintaining its 2% economic role in the global economy within the rapidly growing space economy to achieve $40 billion by 2040, 40 by 40. This is achievable and critically necessary to provide Canadians the security and economic benefits expected from and in Canada's role in the global space economy. Broad and positive trends created in and from space are increasingly at risk, both from natural and man-made space debris, but also from increasingly nefarious actions in space. La mission de North Star est fondée sur la réponse à la situation.
North Star's mission is based on answering the following question. How can we effectively and accurately monitor 300 trillion cubic kilometers of near-Earth space precisely in a useful time frame? To achieve this, North Star's versatile team creates products that go far beyond data collection. North Star relies on worldwide developments in the area of data fusion, artificial intelligence, modelization, and advanced simulation to transform and use data in real time.
Surveillance is accomplished mainly through government and commercial ground-based systems, which are inherently limited by atmospherics and geography. On January the 31st of this year, North Star launched the first ever constellation of space situational awareness satellites to actively survey all near-Earth orbits from space. With a plan to achieve 12 satellites as soon as by the end of 2025, North Star is years ahead of any competing system in the world. In this context, North Star serves as an active sentinel, an early warning system capable for military and civil safety, giving all operators more timely, reliable, and accurate information to assess risks, protect, or maneuver valuable assets in a safe manner. Recently, North Star was one of only 2 companies from a pool of almost 60 Americans to receive a contract from the U.S. National Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, for their first ever Space Watch program. Northstar is active in the US, Europe, and Japan on many other commercial initiatives. Commercial enterprise needs a strong signal from its domestic government about the utility of its capability. Northstar's recent successes create a great opportunity for the Canadian government to leverage private capital and invoke the unique aspects of commercial business that the government must track to gain maximum leverage of innovative commercial space capabilities. En conclusion, Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie de m'avoir.
In closing, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Northstar welcomes all efforts to enhance Canada's future space, including Canada's space defense interests, both at a national and level and through partnerships abroad. I invite you to ask your questions at this point. Thank you.
To you, we do have a 6-minute round, but I don't think we're going to do 6. We'll go to 5, and then hopefully the second round we can get closer to what we should be on the second round. So 5 minutes, Ms. Gallant.
Yes, my questions are for Northstar. Were an adversary to detonate a nuclear device in low Earth orbit and knock out a satellite, how is your company equipped to track the damage from the space debris generated in the aftermath?
We've already actually done that. We participated internationally with the SAC-T, Sprint Advanced Concept Training, since 2019. Organized by the Department of Commerce and the Department of Defense. Northstar has been an active member on a volunteer basis to demonstrate our capabilities. In November of 2021, there was an ASAT, anti-satellite test, done by the Russians. They took out one of their own satellites, and the world turned to Northstar to track that debris. So we've already had experience doing that, and we would continue to use that skill in such a circumstance.
Okay, and how prepared is Canada to deal with a nuclear detonation in space? And are you in regular contact with DND, CAF, or the federal government?
How well we are prepared is dependent on how much we are monitoring the activity in space. My experience and my knowledge of that is more towards my interactions with the U.S., so if you'll permit me, I would say that we don't have a wide field of view system. So to go a little bit technical, the way I describe Northstar, we are a wide field of view system. We see all the Earth's orbits from LEO to MEO, medium Earth orbit, where the GPS satellites are, to geostationary, to cislunar simultaneously. This capacity does not exist. So we are not actually well prepared to track all activities in space generally amongst the allies. Northstar does maintain a relationship with the Department of National Defense here in Canada, and we're looking forward to expanding on that now that our satellites are launched and our services are available.
What is the lag time between a space occurrence and the detection of any related space debris created?
The debris is created, if I understood the question, the debris is created instantaneously upon impact.
And how long does it take Northstar to detect that?
You would detect it immediately if you had a sensor in place. Worst case lag time for us would be a matter of hours, but typically we can see something within minutes.
And what's the minimum size of detection of debris?
That we can see? 1 centimeter in low Earth orbit, 7 centimeters in medium Earth orbit, and 40 centimeters in geostationary.
Given that Chairman Xi is overturning the world's rules-based order, how likely is it that any treaties with respect to space debris would be adhered to?
I'll try not to wax political, but I wouldn't rely on a treaty to protect my assets in space.
Does China have capabilities similar to those of Northstar Earth and Space?
If they don't, they will have them soon.
What is the reaction time to the occurrence of a space debris and detection versus the time that it takes a space asset to be aware of it?
Yeah, you're speaking of data latency. So the whole idea, and it's a great question, is with 4 satellites, we just launched 4, we actually need a critical mass of 12 satellites to be able to detect with a sufficient latency that's fitting within the specifications of minutes. You're talking minutes or seconds. So you need more satellites monitoring more often and then picking up objects multiple times during their orbital pass to get low covariance, which is the error associated with where objects are in space. It's a digression of a question, but the exact location of objects in space is a mathematical calculation. So
Okay.
It takes a while to figure that out.
All right. One for our other witness. I understand that some low Earth orbit satellites can be launched from a C-17 now. They're going towards large aircraft for launch. Will this impact the necessity or any of the business that you have lined up with respect to your company?
It doesn't, in that the market is so large, as Stuart pointed to, the size of the market now with the tens of thousands of satellites that people are intending to put into low Earth orbit to provide services to the world. We're not looking to take any sort of large work share associated with that. And then there's the entire aspect of the logistics and cost associated with a C-17 or some other transport doing it.
Are there any plans to launch military purpose satellites from your spaceport in Nova Scotia in the near future, or will it only launch strictly commercial satellites into space?
We have certainly interest from D&D in what we are doing here for sure, and have interest also from the United States Space Force in what we're doing.
Thank you.
Ms. Lapointe, bienvenue au comité.
You and your company has talked about meeting the challenges of the new space economy. Could you describe for us what you see those challenges as being?
Challenges of participating in the new space economy? It's moving very quickly, so traditional procurement techniques and the ability to transform research and development into monetized commercial activity is the biggest challenge. And when we talk about acceleration of activities in space, we talk about the ability to monetize early and quickly and then to grow. So Northstar, as a private enterprise, raised $140 million not just to develop technology, but also to build and launch 4 satellites. If you do that on a grassroots bootstrap method, you end up being fairly slow at how you get there. So it really is accelerated by the adoption of those products, and having a strong signal and having those products adopted by your domestic government is very helpful in doing work internationally. Barring that, you have to be pretty aggressive to get into other procurement cycles. This year, the procurement cycle in the United States has been fairly hampered by their budget issues, but it all really just comes down to how quickly do we get from the identification of a demand from the government and the procurement plan. So the procurement plan is the weakest link.
In your opening statements, you talked about the sector needing to see some strong signals needed to be seen. Some strong signals needed to be seen by government. So tell us, what do those strong signals look like? What would they be and constitute?
In a word, a contract.
Can you expand?
Buy our services. I mean, we traditionally, I don't think I'm telling any secrets, the OECD has written reports for decades about how Canada does extremely well at developing R&D and then watching that go somewhere else. We are at the precipice of that point as Northstar, as many other commercial entities are in Canada. There was a question on the previous panel asking, how do we retain talent? Make sure there's a business here. People stay for economic reasons. It's really down to very fundamental. They sound like complicated issues, but they're very simple. When there's good jobs to be had and there's good missions that are going on, we have no hard time attracting talent in Northstar. Unfortunately, most of it goes to Luxembourg, where we have our European head office, and in the United States. Attracting people in Canada is a little bit more challenging because it's not as commercially open in that context. It's meant as a constructive criticism, by the way.
The previous witnesses talked about how Canada is falling behind and we're at risk of a declining relevance in this sector. So what challenges do you foresee for Canada specifically in expanding its role in the space defense sector, and how do you propose we overcome those?
Thank you for the question. It's not a secret either that Canada is by far, and I underline by far, the lowest contributor to space of all G7 nations. That's a huge impact to anybody that wants to start a company here, attract talent here, or build innovative technologies here. And I think that needs to be addressed at a policy level and at a strategic level. The good news is, the voice in the wilderness, myself screaming for a few years now, has managed to convince Space Canada, not only of which I'm a board member, to lobby the Canadian government to have a national space council. The chairman of the board of Northstar's U.S. entity is Kevin O'Connell, former director of the Office of Space Commerce under the previous administration. He helped set up or reset up the National Space Council, and we brought him here several times to witness and testify to several people about the importance of having a National Space Council. But setting that up properly is also very important. I want to emphasize, given the opportunity here, that it cannot be run by a specific government department. It must be run by the whole of government. It must come from the Prime Minister's office. That's the way it works in the United States, and that's the way it needs to work here. So I'm very happy that we have a National Space Council, but if we bring it down to the departmental level, we don't get a whole of government coverage. And we must have that. We don't have time to waste on iterating and seeing if we can make it better. Space is moving too quickly. The actions are being too menacing. And everyone is feeling it. I feel it in the questions that people are asking. You're quite aware of the challenges that we're facing. So I would say we need a National Space Council that has national recognition from the Prime Minister's office.
5 minutes, Madame Normandin.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Bain. I'd like to continue in the same vein. You mentioned it without actually mentioning you're someone who have contracts all over the world, and perhaps there's an issue in Canada. Is there a reason why Canada has not signed with you, or are there a host of factors, like the fact that Canada is poorly connected with its industrial base, tends to invest very little or elsewhere for some buy off the shelf? Is there something that I'm missing here, something that might not have been mentioned? Someone says that without strategy, everything seems like a good idea. That's in the military space. There seems to be a lack of strategy in Canada. I work with the Canadian Space Agency, and I have for the last 30 years. The last time we had a long-term space policy was 25 years ago. This is, the frustration exists on both sides. The government is just as frustrated as the private enterprises are, because they don't have a policy that says, okay, this is our policy, this is our priority, and this is where we're going to be investing. It's kind of ad hoc, and that means it's just unclear how to decide. It's not completely unclear or vague, but it is not something really clear to tracks in a strategic sense. I think we need to address this, and again, the way to deal with this is to have a National Space Council. It's to develop a strategy, to have the tools in place. And if the government, from a commercial standpoint, decides that the priority is not what North Star sells or will sell, fine. We'll make our decisions strategically on that basis. But when it's unclear, then it's just unclear. Thank you very much. In the meantime, because I think you answered a question by Madame Gallant about the fact that it's very quick to detect debris when there's a collision. Where do you send this information? It's to your clients, and I would imagine Canada is in the dark when it comes to what happens in the space domain. I'd like to point out that Canada is very actively engaged, along with Americans, in those sites in the U.S. and with their allied support among our Five Eyes countries and within NATO. So Canada is involved in that field and has an important role to play. But domestically, we're not in a position where we sell data directly to Canada. All right. So what I understand is, based on the technology you've developed, this is much more specific detection, much more targeted. Is that something that's missing in Canada? Yes. As you said, just as you said. Thank you. One question for you, Mr. Vader. You mentioned the fact that there's no launching site here in Canada. We have to go elsewhere to find those sites. And there's a saturation of the market at this point. How does it work? Who has the priority to have access to these sites? Is it domestically, so the government decides that the government that owns this, or a company owns this, or how does it work exactly?
Well, there are two major points to that. One is the location matters a great deal. The Space Coast of Florida, where you can put them into a particular trajectory into orbit where you need them, or Vandenberg, for example, on the West Coast. Finding those locations is difficult. So location really matters in those satellites and where they're going to go in orbit, so to be useful. But the second part, of course, is all the other ones internationally, especially in the United States, are government ranges. Government ranges have priority. They will kick everybody else out. SpaceX, et cetera, most of what they're doing is launching other people's government missions along the way, and then in their case, flying their own satellites along the way. So the bottleneck is space. Building satellites on the ground, there's only one way to get them into orbit, and that's launching them. And because they're launching twice, 3 times a week out of Florida, and they can't keep up that tempo, and all these new launch companies are coming online and new satellites are coming online, how are we going to get them all up there to provide service? And that's where I think that opportunity is.
Okay, 30 seconds again. Madame Masson. 5 minutes.
Mr. Matier, to sort of build up of that, so the fact that Canada doesn't have a satellite launch capacity to date has been a significant issue. I know that in the research that you've done, in the building that you've done, there have also been a lot of environmental and safety concerns from the area, from the residents around there. Can you talk about what your company is doing to ensure that we're within, I guess, regulations, or maybe there aren't enough regulations, maybe not for the company, but certainly for the people, and just the conversation around that?
There is a nationally recognized regulatory framework associated with spaceports in particular, and I came out of doing that in the United States, working on a number of spaceports that I've actually licensed, including environmental assessments and how you can care for the territory. It's not just the land around it, it's the space, it's the water and everything that goes along with it. So working to deliver on that environmental assessment and getting that approved in 2019 was a really big piece for us. And it was really modeled after the work that I'd been doing in the United States on a number of similar locations.
Is there still work that needs to be done to further that in order to help industry, but also to ensure that the safety of residents?
It's the execution side now. It's what, you know, we've got the permission. They've looked at every sort of worst case scenario for a launcher that can carry 5 tons to low Earth orbit. So we sort of worst cased it, even using propellants that we're trying to move away from as a global industry. Nonetheless, we did get that qualified for that and found that we can do it safely, and had both federal and provincial participation in that.
In terms of what we've learned from the States, you yourself talked about SpaceX and the domination of that in the private sector. Mm-hmm. What should we be worried about here in Canada on that end, government versus and the regulations versus that lack or that monopoly over the launch industry?
We're behind in the other Five Eyes countries, for sure. We started ahead, and the UK has leaped ahead of us. They've got a technology safeguard agreement. They've got the regulatory framework, and they've been making investment in the infrastructure for spaceport development, even though they're on the wrong side of the pond if you're launching a satellite. So we really have a huge advantage by, being where we are and the timing of it matching what the industry has in place right now. Transport Canada is working to model after the U.S. Part 450 regulations. That's great. That's the world I come out of. Part 420, those kinds of licensing regimes are really I'm comfortable with, and I think I can help bring and deliver there. The agreement through the Minister of Transport is that we'll use existing CARs to be able to do a case-by-case launch while we're maturing the rest of that regulatory framework over the years ahead.
Mr. Bain, in the discussions around that nuclear detonation tests, I believe that you were talking about running, or what you saw through the American tests that you had seen, that was only on other satellites and equipment up in space, correct?
Yeah, let me just go back on
Sorry,
the details.
yeah, if you could clarify that a little bit.
Yeah, so the question was on a nuclear explosion in space and how would we detect that. I said the same way we would have used during a SAC-T, Sprint Advanced Concept Training drill that we were part of in 2021 when the Russians performed an anti-satellite test, so ASAT, but they did it with a conventional weapon on their own satellite. They destroyed their own satellite. So several countries have done this. Northstar and many other countries and companies around the world have signed anti-satellite treaties. And so it was the experience that we had was gained on doing it with a domestic rocket, domestic weapon, a traditional weapon on their own domestic satellite.
So there's no known understanding then of what a non-traditional weapon.
Well, if you're going to use a nuclear weapon, it would be much more expansive in terms of the damage, and it would, like anywhere else, first of all, nuclear explosion in space is absolutely unacceptable at any level. Same as an ASAT test. I'm an environmentalist. You don't want to put any explosions or explosives up in space because the debris stays for decades, and it goes up and it goes out because you're shooting from the ground, and it tends to go up further, and the further it goes up, the longer it takes to come down based on gravity. So it's not acceptable. There are various orbits in space that are prime real estate. SpaceX occupies the most prime real estate. That's a chain. They call it the Starlink orbit. It's very heavily populated, and causing a chain reaction in that orbit would be devastating to communications.
Thank you, Ms. Manson. Mr. Kelly, 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Sorry, not 5 minutes. Hang on.
Yeah,
I think we can. I think we could do 5. Okay.
So on the same vein then, how much existing debris currently inhibits potential low Earth orbits?
There's 130 million pieces of debris flying around in space uncontrolled. Each of them is posing a threat to operating satellites. Our system is designed, I'll come back to the question, but our system is designed to help people navigate around that debris. To put it in different terms, it's like the 401 would have every car that's ever had an accident on the 401 still there, and you'd have to drive around it. That's the way space is operating right now.
Right, and you know the obviously exponentially larger space for potential satellite orbits is a factor, and I'm asking are there prime pathways or prime orbits that are threatened by this debris? Like, are there areas where an operator would say, I can't launch this satellite because of the debris hazard? Already happened. Okay, already happened.
Our launch was delayed. Other launches get delayed because there's a debris cloud that's flying overhead. We never used to deal with that before. And I'm talking not so long ago.
Okay, what are the sources of debris? What creates debris?
Man-made things that have expired in space, collisions in space, which are not as many, but it's leftover pieces of equipment all the way back to Apollo.
Okay, and we've talked about now in Ms. Matheson's question, she talked about about weapons in space and about the potential, the catastrophe. We've had testimony about a nuclear explosion in space, but we've crossed over a lot of unthinkable events in fairly recent years. So I think we have to no longer accept that something is unthinkable. The war in Ukraine would have thought to be unthinkable, but it happened. So let's not be restrained by what we think is unthinkable. How best can Canadian policymakers deal with the threat? Is there a way to secure or to mitigate the risk of unthinkable events of the weaponization of space?
I like the way you're thinking. The answer is you can't move fast enough. Objects in space move at 16 kilometers a second. You don't have time to react. You have to predict in advance. So when I talked about, on the French part of my presentation, when I talked about what NorthStar does, we do what nothing else in the world can do. We'll look at space, and then we'll use artificial intelligence and algorithms to predict where objects are going to be in 48, 96, or more hours, giving people enough time to move out of the way. So this capability needs to be embraced generally. I'm obviously biased by saying by NorthStar's capability, but you can't go by it anywhere else. Canada is actually a world leader in this technology and this capability. And so that is the type of system that must be adopted. And my meetings with the Pentagon, again, we're non-classified. So I can have as many discussions as I like about what the general problem is. I'm trying to monitor 300 trillion cubic kilometers of space.
We heard in the previous panel, though, industry being limited by the lack of getting classified briefs. In other words, industry doesn't know what the threats, what the threat analysis of the government actually is, because it's classified. Do you lack, or do you see a loss of business opportunity for lack of the correct information from policymakers about their actual defense needs?
I was in the Pentagon 2 weeks ago. I have no lack of information to know what my system needs to do to be able to deliver.
What about from the Canadian government, though?
I don't have those types of meetings with the Canadian government.
Would they be commercially beneficial?
To me, they would.
But they're not happening. Yeah. What about? I think you do understand that this is not to be a platform, I guess, to sell the business, but for any defense contractor to be able to supply the Canadian military the services that it needs, do they get the information they need to be able to tailor products or create products?
You're asking a really deep question, because I will not speak on behalf of the DND. They have a policy and a procedure that they have to follow when they set their priorities. So my stock answer on that question is, where's the National Space Council? Where's the National Space Policy? Where are the priorities that we can follow and identify so that we can move forward? Because without that, we're floating in space.
That is, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. That's almost as bad a joke as I do. Madame Lalonde, 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Thanks to both of you for being here. When you think about civil satellite in Canada, I think, according to our notes, 1962 was the first leaving from the United States. In 2013, we had another launch leaving from India, I understand. Mr. Mathieu, I would really like you to take this time to formalize why is it so important that Canada creates its own Canada's launching capabilities, and maybe leading to recommendation a little bit as we are studying this. And then I'll go to Mr. Bain. Thank you.
Recent discussions with the United States Space Force in their assured access to space initiatives that we're a part of as well. They've made clear in memorandum as well to their National Space Council that they would like to see Canadian launch capability. Two primary reasons for that. One is that Florida is kind of a sitting duck for a Category 5 or some other player. And loss of that launch capability means for everybody, us included. And the other is launching twice a week, they're about maxed out. The air traffic industry is yelling and screaming. They're trying to expand as much as they can, but things are moving pretty quickly, and they're congested, basically. It's because there is so much backlog of launch that we've been affected by. We've had to wait to launch satellites into orbit by a year or two because of our priority call by a U.S. government. So having our own priority for a launch capability, providing backup to the United States or a replacement if they're taken out, are kind of the three main ones.
And I'm just going to ask you, we talked a lot in the new DPU, the importance of the Arctic, and certainly for us, for me, it's all about our sovereignty. How does that fit, if I could say, within your interpretation of how a launch within Canadian soil could help on the sovereignty piece of our defense strategy?
Do polar sun-synchronous orbits, which are the ones that go over the poles, basically. Sun-sync, it has to... Anyway, polar-type orbits are what we can offer because we hang out over the top of the North Atlantic. We have a launch due south, basically straight down over Africa and into orbit. It's because of that access over the poles, that's what's so popular for many of these satellite developers for just that kind of thing.
And Mr. Bain, I don't want to go back. I think you were very clear about, who you represent and what it is. But I wanted to ask you about the debris. You mentioned a lot of numbers, 130 million debris that are currently floating. How is there technology or something to look into that dynamic of actually removing those debris? I remember years ago, had the privilege of visiting Telesat, and we're talking already about the cemetery of where those debris, and like you said, from years ago. How does that, because as we're launching more, or la commercialisation is needed. From a defense perspective, I think we absolutely need to, but there's debris there that are also at risk of impacting some of the, risk.
Yep, you're right. Where do I start? 130 million pieces of debris sounds like a lot, but they're in certain bands. They're not all over the place, but they're in the bands that are, as you would imagine, the most popular. Your honourable member asked me earlier, I didn't answer his question, but there are specific bands in space. There are specific orbits in space that are much more desirable. Polar orbits, sun-synchronous orbits, where RadarSat flies. Medium Earth orbits where the GPS systems fly. The hardest thing that we deal with from the ground, just to give you something else to think about, is a spent rocket. Once it's taken a satellite to geostationary, there's a piece that's left that's about the size of a city bus, and it moves at 16 kilometers a second in a highly elliptical orbit that goes all the way out to geostationary and comes all the way back to low Earth orbit and goes back out again. And it's on the equatorial plane. It goes right past the GPS satellites every day, and there's no way to track it from the ground. So these things are happening without a lot of people being aware. These things are happening, and they must be tracked, which is why Northstar created our system.
So, but that's great to track, and I completely agree. But should we look at also removing them? Like, should we look at technology to actually do something else than sending them to a less desirable orbit circle?
In my business, you can break a lot of laws, but you can't break the laws of physics. An item, you can imagine a city bus moving at 16 kilometers a second. I don't know what technology you could use to grab it, reorient it, and bring it down to low, and bring it down out of its orbit. It has a tendency to want to stay there. It will degrade over time, and so what you're really doing is waiting for it to degrade and fall out and come back down to Earth. It'll do it eventually. But there are other objects in space, and there are a lot of technologies, and there are a lot of companies. We work with a company in the United States, and they're international, called Astroscale, and they do active debris removal. But what they call debris, and you guys maybe think of debris as just a piece of junk, but a spent satellite that's still intact, but and can be picked up about this size, could be grabbed and pulled out of space. But now you're launching a satellite with a rocket to grab a satellite and bring it back down out of orbit. And you've got 130 million pieces to take care of. So the technology has a long way to go to be able to do that kind of cleanup. Yeah.
All right. 2.5 minutes plus 30 seconds.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Bain.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bain. Let's keep going on space debris. You referred to buses basically moving this quickly. You can identify objects that are much smaller, 1 centimeter, 10 centimeter wide. I would imagine a bus can cause a lot of damage if it has a collision with a satellite. But I'm also wondering what happens with these smaller debris. What does this mean for Canada if Canada cannot identify that small debris? What risk is that? It's an immediate risk. Since since working on a number of commercial missions, a number of them, my experience, is that there are collisions every day, satellites in space. There's no atmosphere, so there are no vibrations. There's nothing that we can touch on in order to change the stability of the satellite. But the satellites, they move in space. Why? Because debris hit the satellites on a daily basis, meaning that satellites start shifting within the constellations, and that is something we need to track. We need to seriously watch. It's an immediate threat. So our system is designed somewhat for that. And this is the question. Do we have the way to navigate around all of this? That's the question as far as I'm concerned. Can we provide enough information ahead of time to navigate securely? Thank you very much. And as a follow-up, is there a risk in the future that there might be an increase in the number of the large-sized debris or even small-sized debris, in the sense that there are collisions? Would one or the other grow more, or is it similar? The most dangerous is the largest debris, of course, clearly, the smallest debris, if it's a micro collision, that you can handle, but a huge size satellite, that size or larger, is catastrophic. There you have it. And quickly, I have a bit of time left. Among those technologies that are being designed for new satellites, I hear Japan has developed something made of wood that could easily degrade. Are there things that we should watch out for in the future? There is a company here in Canada that is developing launchers that use propellant that is actually renewable. They take former plastic. They chemically they devise a system that is renewable when it comes to this propellant. I found that really quite interesting. Thank you.
And Normandine, 2.5 minutes, Ms. Masson.
Mr. Bain, I wanted to ask you, so you talked about the Space Council, you talked about it being run from the PMO. Is that solely because of the priority that you think that you need and that can only come from the PMO? If that's the case, fair enough. But how do we ensure that something like a Space Council that is meant to maybe bring balance, neutrality, nonpartisanship, how do we ensure that in that case?
That's a great question. It's all by representation. You want representation from the government. You want representation from the commercial enterprise. You want representation from non-government organizations. You want everybody to have a certain amount of seat at the table, to have a voice, to be able to express concerns or raise issues, and work it in an open manner. Back to the leadership question. It's by other people's experiences that we know that it has to be run by the top, because efforts to do it in any other way were not successful. And so, as an environmentalist wanting to protect the environment of space and wanting things to move quickly, I don't want to waste any time. So we know that the formula is it must come from the top. It has to be from the PMO.
Okay. Mr. Matthew, same question.
My experiences with the United States National Space Council and its effectivity and the participation of the user advisory groups, I think, is really fundamental to it, which is the commercial companies that participate in it, and really getting the focus committees that are set up and populated and represented by the government, and then those committees populated to really put the emphasis where it needs to be put.
1 minute. The really big question, of course, was back to that nuclear side of things. What is the bigger impact, I guess, that the Canadian government has in terms of our responsibility to future generations and that environmental impact? Is it the push forward to that bigger détente of the bigger the weapon, the more détente, or is it through negotiations on a non-nuclear proliferation?
I think you've touched on a lot of really interesting subjects. Yeah, you've done really well, because your other comments are the same. I drove past the Russian embassy last night on Charlotte Street with my son, and I pointed it out. And my son said, "Why do we still have an embassy here?" I said, "Because it's the only way you keep communicating with people to solve problems. You must keep the lines of communication open." International collaboration is fundamental, and we will return to a normal and stable environment in space if we have faith in humanity to do that, and North Star's tools and other people's activities in this area are fundamental to that. Military activity, the same as civil activity, has a role to play in securing a safe environment.
Thank you, Ms. Masson. Mr. Ruff, welcome to the committee. 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. I got really a set of questions for both witnesses. So first, to maritime launch. It's too bad you didn't exist and were up and running a number of years ago, because it's one of the Canadian competitors for SpaceX. Part of the reason they lost out was because they wanted to launch from Canadian launch station, and they missed that opportunity, and they would have beat out, and maybe we'd have something different than space or Starlink and everything tied to SpaceX and some of the other stuff, if that would have happened. But anyway, specifically for you, I want you to get on the record on that military side of this house is what benefit, to certain, I get there's certain capabilities. You do have a connection with, obviously, the CAP, D&D. What specific capabilities is Canada dependent upon, or will be dependent upon, that by having our own domestic launch? Can you just get that clearly, the specific military context?
Probably the key is the Earth observation. I mean, that's what it's all about with most of these satellites going into orbit, is looking down. It's not about looking up. and the ability of those satellites to monitor activities on the ground, whether it's GHG or movement, as we've seen in Ukraine, and the monitoring that we've been doing there, and our ability to do that ourselves unhindered.
And I'm assuming, too, Ms. Lalonde brought up the Arctic side of the house, and obviously I think that's a huge advantage that can't be underestimated, is that polar sort of launches that we can have. And a similar theme to you, Mr. Bain, with North Star. Can you explain specifically, I understand fully what you're trying to do and the need for it, but to convince Canadians, convince governments to put the necessary resources to all of these different space aspects that we need, but in particular, sort of what the value you bring to the table, or an industry, another company similar to what you're proposing, the impact and benefit to not only military capabilities that, for Canada and our allies, but to industry, from the so what of how, if these collisions happen, because ultimately that's the challenge that governments are facing right now with limited money, is to how do we make Canadians understand this is the value added by preventing these collisions, tracking the debris, etc.
On the general note, I don't like to refer to it as a space economy or the economy, because it's all the economy. The economy in space is the economy, and Canada must maintain its position and be competitive in that market. That's an argument. It's about people keeping their jobs. It's about education, and it's about a cycle of training people, keeping people, and building a sound economic base here in Canada and maintaining that. I think it's pretty simple to understand for Canadians that we don't do anything. In the 1970s, we put up the GPS satellites. Nobody knew what to do with them. Now you can't do anything without them. And so that's what space is. It's fundamental to your life. There's nothing you can do on a given day between a financial transaction at the bank or getting something delivered to your house to eat that doesn't go through a system that involves a satellite. They're fundamental to the fabric. And very importantly, there's no backward compatibility. We can't go back to the old system of communicating, to the old system of navigating, to dial-up phones. Doesn't work. We're dependent on the space satellite systems. So let's make sure it stays there. And the only way to do that is to be a good environmentalist and protect the environment.
So tied to that is our space companies that are launching now, and this could go to either one of you, but I imagine maybe more with you, Mr. Bain, is Canada demanding for anything that we're launching here domestically, or that is a Canadian nexus, or even other of our partners in the international community demanding that any new launches have end of life cycle planned into it with a mandatory degrade, so that we're not just leaving crap up there, for lack of better words?
Yes, there is that initiative is certainly afoot, but it's not codified in any sort of way. There is new technology developments, mission extension kits for upper stages, for example, to be able to go and deploy and do other things, remove satellites from orbit, or provide a fielding platform to extend the life of satellites so that you don't have to keep launching more, that kind of thing.
The mechanisms that you can pull on are our own domestic policy, but also the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, in assigning frequency, as though it may seem abstract. In order to get frequency, you should comply with certain performance criteria in terms of deorbiting and removal, and there are very much a lot of good guidelines that are involved in that. And the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, the Director General there is very active on making sure, Arti Holomaini, she's very active on making sure that global policy goes towards making sure you don't launch before you have a set policy. So like we have call before you dig, I say think before you launch.
Final 5 minutes. This is the Defense Committee, and we've heard all kinds of testimony that we're kind of a little late and a dollar short to our involvement in space. It seems to me that the vulnerabilities to being dependent upon operatives who are outside of the country is pretty abundant. You know, I'm sure the Ukrainians get a little nervous when they're dependent upon Elon Musk as to whether they get their signals or whether they don't get their signals. Similarly, the geopolitics of the United States makes one a little nervous as to us not having the ability to either launch or to do what you do, Mr. Bain, or various other things. I don't think that message is sunk in with either the political class or Canadians writ large. So what, sketch out for us what military and security vulnerabilities we've left ourselves open to by not being as involved as we should be. So I'll start with you, Mr. Mathieu, and then go to Mr. Bain.
I guess the way I would answer that is it's related to the recognition by the other five countries that are stepping up. They're recognizing that vulnerability that they have right now, whether it's the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and +2 even. These other countries are actively engaging to bring rocket launch capability, even if they're in the wrong place, the wrong side of the pond, as it were. They're trying to get something in place so that they will have that ability to provide that backup capability. It is kind of a scary world down there. I bring my U.S. passport with me so I can speak openly about my feelings about the U.S. and that potential disruption, if you will, because of the politics there and where things stand. It is a scary world we're living in, and we really do need to get people's attention. When I look across the border as a Canadian looking south to the U.S., it's like watching a train wreck going on. And not having access to that launch capability there on a day in and day out basis could be really fundamentally flawed to just the kinds of things that he's talking about, going to an ATM machine or going to buy tickets to a football game or hockey game. So I think it's the cause and effect that I don't think is really well understood.
Games. Mr. Bain?
I'm a Canadians fan. Sorry. I bleed red, white, and blue. Painting a picture for you. In every threat, there is an opportunity. You've identified and acknowledged there's a tremendous threat. I've heard it in previous testimonies. I've listened to the videos in advance. There is a tremendous threat. It's an opportunity. And we must take that as an opportunity. David Henry Thoreau said, the world is our canvas, and so for our imaginations. So we need to get our imaginations in gear and move forward without restricting ourselves on what we think the way we used to do it is the way we need to do it now. Take a page out of Steve Jobs' book. Why are we doing it this way? It's the way we've always done it. We need to stop that. We need to create new ways, new policies, and we need to embrace. And we need to err on the side of leaning in instead of on the side of, well, we need to study that. So if I had $1 for every time somebody told me I needed to slow down and be more patient, I wouldn't have $140 million because I went and raised money anyway. So the answer is Canada must, if it wants to be a leader in space, lean in on its initiative, lean in and listen and act outside of what their typical comfort zone or policy used to say. And that's why I've asked and pushed, and so it's come through our Space Canada Council, Space Canada board. We must have a National Space Council. We must have a policy. We must move quickly. We must be clear in our objectives. And we must leave this planet because what we do in this life echoes in eternity. We must leave this planet for the future generations so that they can have access to what I had access to, watching Neil Armstrong walk down the ladder. They don't have that, and they need it. And it's our responsibility to make space safer.
Thank you. That's a good ending for our session. With that, we'll adjourn, and colleagues will meet you on Wednesday afternoon, subject to the votes. Meeting adjourned. Thank you again.